Okay, guys, so we've been talking a lot about anime in the Discord lately, and we've been talking a lot about it on stream. So let's watch this video about Jujutsu Kaisen because I've absolutely been spoiling myself on this series lately. God, I love anime.
It's hard to compartmentalize that Hunter x Hunter started its tenure in the 90s, because it very much feels like a commentary on the shonen
Yeah.
tropes it would inspire. And I don't just mean it's critical or deconstructive, because I don't think it's trying to be. In fact, I think it not only revels in those conventions, but also takes them to their natural endpoints. You see, I really liked Yu Yu Hakusho.
Me too.
For all of its faults near the end, it is a very endearing story, because Tagashi has a real knack for making every character feel like genuine people.
Yeah, Kuwabara is such an interesting character in Yu Yu Hakusho, and that's like one of my favorite characters, hands down. I think that he's sort of the human insert, the personal insert for you, as a a character who is not meant for this world that he's in currently, but he's found himself there and he struggles to get through it, but he does get through it eventually, and that's a really great insert for the viewer. I think all the time about Yu Yu Hakusho and that moment where the original Spirit Detective is sitting on that couch waiting for Yusuke to show up to fight him, and he's watching the tape that is of all of the horrible atrocities that humans have committed over the time that they've been on the earth. And I think about that all the time whenever I'm looking for it through Instagram or social media for too long, and I think that's what we've made here. We've made that videotape. That's just a collection of all of the terrible parts of humankind.
Guys that you could actually meet. This plays into the themes of the story pretty well, that we like to
Me when I
substitute
scroll too
those who
far.
we share ambitions with. As much as he wanted to explore that even more, Shonen Jump take a lot of pride in their terrible storytelling. So a story as real or even as dark as Yu Yu
Yeah.
was shaking up to be just wouldn't fit in the mold.
Yeah, it's shonen anime. I think about this. So this is the thing about shonen anime. You have to understand what shonen anime is in order to have a solid opinion on shonen anime. If you're just someone who always hates on shonen anime and you only like these super obscure, really off the wall, super desperately deep storytelling anime, then you're not going to like shonen. But I don't think that means that shonen is bad. It means that it doesn't, work with your personality super well. I do like shonen anime, but I say that from a place of it's not. I don't just sit around watching shonen anime all the time. I grew up on shonen anime. I grew up with Naruto, and I grew up with Bleach, and I remember these shows extremely fondly, but going back and watching them as an adult who wants a little bit more substance often leaves me feeling some kind of empty. There's not quite that depth to it that I want it to be, but it is this incredible, beautiful sort of scene to scene fight. It's like Marvel versus DC in my brain. Marvel is still fun and interesting and really well done in a lot of ways, but as I get older, I'm more interested in the storytelling that is the DC universe. I want more dialogue. I want more theming. I want more things that are going to take me deep into them. But I still enjoy shonen anime the same way that I still enjoy pop music, even though I'm a musician who enjoys a whole lot of technical music and math and all of these kinds of different things that are going on inside of more obscure things. Maybe even though calling Rush obscure is super silly at this point, but Rush is not pop music, and if you're trying to compare pop music to Rush, you're going to have a bad time and you're going to think that it's not very good. But what you don't get is that pop music is its own metric of measuring things, and pop music can be measured on scales of good to bad, just the same way that everything that is experimental and everything that is out there isn't necessarily good. You have to measure them on the scale of what they're trying to be, and that's what I think a lot of people miss with shonen anime.
I think that's why Hunter x Hunter has those commonalities with the magazine's past and present outings. It's the story that the magazine wanted Tagashi to make in the first place. But as the story continues, it seems to be asking what if these fantastical elements, these plucky archetypes, and this larger-than-life story for kids existed in the real world?
Yeah.
What if that classic indomitable human spirit was shown as a bad thing? What if a child was forced to grow out of his self-centeredness because his worldview was shown to be hypocritical and flawed?
Totally.
What if the star of that revenge subplot was continuously isolated because of his ambitions? What if the kid's stricken with self?
I feel like we're going to get a lot into philosophy during the course of this, and that's going to be kind of a hard thing for some people to watch for sure. But just you'll maybe you can get through it and you can sort of understand where I'm coming from. It is an odd concept, right? This idea of personal growth and the way that we see that through storylines. That as you go on through life, your worldview is going to be tested, and if you haven't forged it properly, it's going to break eventually. And as it breaks, you're going to have to rebuild from the pieces over and over again until you get one that actually fits. I got a comment a super long time ago that said something along the lines of, "You seem very confident in your worldview. How do you know whenever you need it to change, or do you have any ability to change that worldview?" And the answer is yes, I definitely do. I've changed my worldview a dozen times plus over the course of my lifetime, and that's been an experience that I've had to really understand how it works. I've made mistakes in my life. I've had concepts in my brain about the way the world works that were proven to me to be untrue. And that's why I love being alive so much, is because when I find those, I can go back, I can regroup, I can rebuild, and I'll have come up with something that I feel like truly works. And over time, I might find that that isn't the case anymore. And when that happens, I'll have to go back, I'll have to regroup, and I'll have to rebuild something else with all the things that I've learned to make something new. And that's what I think that a lot of the storytelling in these animes is they become this sort of meta experiment with themselves of, a lifetime of a person working on them and the way that that shifts and changes over time. That's why I think Berserk is so interesting. This person literally spent most of their existence creating this story, and as that story goes, you see the change in that person and the thoughts that they have about things. You see the characters become one another in some kind of ways. You see that human process happen where, you think that you're one thing, but life creates a different thing than what you think you are. And if you're not careful, eventually you sort of look back on yourself, or not even if you're not careful, just the way things work, you sort of look back on yourself and you go, I can't believe I used to feel that way. That was so untrue. And I became something that is almost inverse to that and has a different sort of feeling to that and has a different sort of worldview than that. But it doesn't mean that you are wrong for being what you are now. It just means that you are a different thing that you are now, or than you were then.
Actually got to address it. Seriously, you guys think this is okay? Shonen characters nowadays have a problem with being selfish. More so that they aren't selfish enough. They don't look out for themselves, especially compared to their predecessors. However, that selfishness, that stubbornness that allows you to cling to your life and your dreams is the very reason why we, in the real world, can't connect to each other, why we destroy each other. Our hubris is our worst enemy. Togashi likens animals and beasts to be better than us.
The further you go in success, the more you have to sacrifice. Success currently is really, and we might be coming out the other side of this because it's been happening for a while now, and it just feels like as time goes on, the paradigm shifts. But, the success that you're looking for, which is what we're so pushed into finding right now with all the hustle culture and all of those things, get more money, get more, fame, get more clout, always be posting content, always be out here doing this thing. That is a sacrifice that you are making. You are giving away years of your life in pursuit of a goal that may never happen, and you're forgetting to live the life that you're in currently because of that a lot of times. And so you have to realize what you're doing, because any decision made without realization is not a decision that you're making. It is a roll of dice that is happening because you're a human programmed to do those rolls of the dice. So the only thing that really makes us linked in or thoughtful is the actual decision making and the understanding of what the decision that we're making every single day of our lives is. So that's something to chew on as we're watching this video.
Because any action from them exists purely from instincts. However, we choose to be awful to each other. And the only thing that's so great about being a human is that we can realize that and change.
Hindsight's 20/20, man.
JJK's characters don't work. They can't work. They're not given enough time to work.
Where are you going with this?
For example, the trio is formed and then separated as soon as they become real friends. The downfall of Geto is sped run and hidden inventory. Gojo comes out of the box, dies, and doesn't even recognize the tragedy of Shibuya.
Yeah.
Maki carries on the love of a sister we barely knew. And if you're at all related or affectionate towards Megami, good luck even being on screen. But there are
Yes, agreed. I don't think that's a flaw. I think that's by design, though. I think that they are using conventions that we already know about shonen anime to sort of allow us to fill in the gaps so there is less for them to do to give us this story that they want to tell. And I think that's an interesting way that art sort of works. You don't need to explain these things because we've already seen them. You don't need to explain that Gojo and Geto are people who have already experienced the typical shonen anime rise to power, rise to fame, rise to having a great, romp through this world that they're existing in where they're having all these adventures. We tune into them as they've already had those things happen to them, and we're seeing the close of a character arc that we never got to see because we didn't need to. We have seen it time and time again in multiple other characters. And in fact, we're sort of Jujutsu Kaisen is a show that is showing us these moments in time, and it's scoping that single moment out like crazy. It's stretching the fabric of that moment to show us much more detail of that moment. Whereas Naruto will spend a much longer time showing many, many more moments that all spread out together, and we get to see that full character development. Jujutsu Kaisen only wants us to see this one thing. It wants us to see how brutal this world is. It wants us to see that these characters are sort of living in an existence where everything is tumultuous and turmoil, and we think that in the first couple episodes we're going to be in this school where these kids are going to learn and they're going to be taught, and all this different sort of safe ways of existing are going to be provided to them. And we found out very quickly that that's not true. We find out that Gojo and Geto are people who have, not really, but who have survived, that they are not these opulent, super powerful human beings, and that has been a gift to them and all of their friends. It has been the only thing that keeps them standing as the world washes over them constantly. They're the pyramids of Giza. They're not the civilization of New York City, if that makes sense.
There are more subtle things. We're told the kids from Kyoto have a bond that is inseparable, even if they have their own values and truths. And yet the only person we really get to know is Toto. I mean, if it wasn't for the insanity that was the Gainax-inspired mech episode, I would still be rolling my eyes to people who actually felt sorry for Mechamaru. In fact, I question the necessity for the school setting in the first place. Of course, it's an analogy for the conservative world, and who better to indoctrinate traditions into children than the education system?
Yeah.
But schools can be much more than that. They can be opportunities for socializing and being taught important history. It's honestly really disappointing that most of the teachers we see have a more go-get-em teaching style rather than something that would require more occasions that necessitate sitting down in one place. I mean, Gojo doesn't even talk nor gas up half of his students, and I don't even know what Udahime's deal is, but whatever.
We're not living in a world anymore where that's the case, right? We are living in a world where you're constantly thrown into the fire and you're forged or you're broken down. That is the existence that we have currently. Being able to experience the world is no longer something that you have to go out and do, and thus no longer necessitates you being of any kind of age or experience level to be able to do that. We have a window into the outside world constantly in our hands, and that has changed the way that teaching happens. Sitting in one place and socializing with your peers is not the way the world works anymore, and this show sort of shows that in some kind of ways. Also, you have to think about the person that Gojo is. Gojo is somebody who has completely rebuked the idea that there is anyone who can tell him what to do because he is so extremely powerful that he thinks that all of these people who have lived longer than him and might have more wisdom to share with him are just old fogies who never knew what it was like to actually be powerful. And if they had lived the life that he would, they would completely forego their thoughts and their advice that they're giving him. He is somebody who will never take advice from anyone because he believes that he doesn't need to. He believes that he cannot make a mistake because he is above making mistakes. You get what I'm saying? He's this character that has these worldviews and these perspectives that are flawed because of the existence that he's had. We want them to be perfect because we want to see perfection in a person, but perfection is not something that human beings can have. They are flawed individuals. And I'm not making any apologies or trying to defend the poor storytelling that might or might not happen in Jujutsu Kaisen, but I do think that it's important to sort of understand that perspective of what we're seeing here. It is not meant to be perfect. It is a story that captures these moments in time with these characters and what their lives are like. Ghetto is not someone who comes to the right conclusions about the world around him. He is somebody who almost definitely comes to the wrong conclusions, but it almost feels like there's no way he could have come to any other conclusion given the life that he was given. It's a exercise in character development and what kinds of characters come from what kinds of situations, but done extremely quickly in order to get it into the mouths of the people and out the other side.
We're so far removed from Jujutsu High that it doesn't bother me anymore. What matters are the factions and people that we're left with. Now we're left with the Culling Games, an arc filled to the brim with gag characters of one-note personalities that either die anyway or encourage intrigue before dying. Yeah. And now the only protagonists we have left to root for are people like Choso and Hikari. Great. When the series killed off...
I'm not a... Choso just gets introduced to this character who's the brother of those other blood brothers, and then he's related to Yuji, and then it's just such an odd shoehorn sort of thing. That is true, for sure.
Secondary antagonist, Kenjaku. I felt a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah.
Jujutsu Kaisen's graveyard gets
character.
More and more steep as time passes, and at a certain point, I must ask, how many characters must pass away for the story's themes and messages to be fully realized? JJK explores its themes through the depth of its cast members, through the harsh reality of its world, and the forced individuality that comes from sorcery. I understand that. But what's the point of caring about that individuality, that harsh reality, if the characters we're seeing the world through keep disappearing? The best way to communicate an idea in the story is through character. But there's no one left to communicate the ideas through. Jujutsu Kaisen's cast elicits intrigue that is cut short because of the lack of screen time the characters have when alive, and the deaths that come to them way too early. And I don't think that should be excused because...
But this, once again, this plays into... Well, let's see what he's going to say before I talk about
JJK's subtextual themes. The problem with overvaluing subtext in the story is that it puts emphasis on the message rather than how that message comes across, excusing the actual happenings in the plot because of what you think the plot is trying to say.
Oh, that's such a difficult argument to make, because I think that you can very easily make the other comparison with that as well. That the subtext is as much the story as anything else is. That there are things going on. There's the plot, there's characterization, there's the subtext, and there's themes. And you have to sort of look at all of these things in a balance and see how they're done. I think that the characterization in Jujutsu Kaisen is extremely well done, in that you sort of can imagine what these characters are in the lives that they've had. You kind of see Toji, and you can almost infer exactly the life that Toji has gone through the little hints that they give you about his personality, that you almost don't need to flesh him out completely. And this is sort of the beautiful thing about art building on itself over a really, really long period of time, because we've had so much context from manga and anime already leading up to this point. You can forego some of that because we have this sort of understood knowledge about the thing. You don't need to tell me what time signatures are, and you don't need to tell me what BPM is, and you don't need to tell me what keys of a song are, because I've already learned all of those things. So now I can get on to just experiencing music as it comes out, and we can make it more and more complex and more we can drop from a drum and bass breakdown into a math rock emo tappy guitar part with upbeat vocals over top of it, and I can understand how that flow could work because I've listened to a lot of music that comes that way already. You can speed run this density of music, and we're having this sort of coalescence of all of these different art forms currently, where we're almost implying the existence of a new thing that is happening, this hyper mashup, hyper quick scrolling onto the next thing. Let's see where this is going. I don't need all of this context way of thinking about the world around us. And I think that Gojo as a teacher in this world sort of embodies that feeling of some of you are going to die, some of you are going to survive, and this carefree, attitude is the only thing that you can have, because what else can you do? There is no change to be made. The world is existing the way that it is, and we have to live in that world. So you have to decide whether or not you're going to be happy with it or whether you're going to be bitter about it. And finding that balance in yourself and finding that balance in the show is sort of the challenge of this anime in a way. This, am I going to just enjoy the ride and come out the other side and think about these things that are happening to it over a long period of time, or am I going to try to be overly critical and have all these negative opinions and while the world continues to pass me by? Am I going to hang up on this show that's only going to exist for a section of our lives and then, continue to live in this moment, or am I going to live in the moments as they come?
Like, hey Naya, did you know that it's totally fine if a bunch of characters from Bleach get underutilized or encouraged to stay stagnant because the whole thing is a metaphor for enlightenment and nirvana? Like, okay. When your story is so centered around its cast that the world literally moves because of them, or we see more of the world because of them, it leads to a much more satisfying and enriching experience. When your story is the character, or the characters that are in it, it's immediately much more engaging. Jujutsu Kaisen knows this.
Yes. Cowboy Bebop is a really good example of that. And so is Samurai Champloo, because those shows are completely about the characters. They only exist for around 30-ish episodes. But different strokes for different folks, and different things are going on inside of these shows. That's just the way that it happens, sort of. And trying to compare something like Cowboy Bebop to something like Jujutsu Kaisen is like comparing apples to oranges, although that is something that you can do, and it's totally fine to do that. I think that sort of pigeonholing a story to what we think it has to be is detrimental to the furthering of artistic creativity.
It's not a plot-driven story. The
Into our
story
own
is
thoughts.
only happening because of the ideals of a character and how the rest of the cast react to those ideals.
That's
The
sort of
only
what life
reason
is.
JJK feels like it's plot-driven to so many people is because it's notorious for neglecting its own characters, despite those characters being so
I wouldn't say it's plot driven. I know I'm pausing it a lot, but I keep having thoughts about the things that he's saying. I wouldn't say Jujutsu Kaisen is plot driven. I would say that it's thematically driven, and I would say that it is, really it's character driven. We're seeing these moments of these characters. We just get such few moments with them, but they really stick with you. When Gojo is in the Shibuya incident and he kills Haname, you have a moment where you go, is Gojo a good guy or not? Because I don't know if he actually is. And that's such a character, that's such a, oh my goodness, that's such a good example of characterization. That's such a good example of character development, that you get to see all these different sides of people, these things that in certain circumstances, without context, you would feel like that's so awesome and dope that he just killed this cursed spirit. But because of what you're learning in that time period about cursed spirits, you start to have second thoughts about who really are the good people here and what even is the good outcome that could happen. It almost feels like it's only bad that could happen. And that's important to remember as well.
influential on the movement of the narrative.
This is such a dense video.
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Please open his mouth.
Guts and Griffith differ in a lot of ways. Griffith is a futurist. He saw a castle he can never reach and wanted his own. He's creating his own kingdom as we speak, but he doesn't want to stop there. But the thing about such a great ambition is that it can't exist without a cost. There's nothing wrong with aiming towards the heavens, but a crossroad is made. When the time comes for you to choose between the present that you know, surrounded by the people that you love, or the future at the sacrifice of those same people, which would you pick? It's a story that's oddly critical of being passionate. In fact, it's a lot like Hunter x Hunter in that regard. When you're so zeroed in on your purpose, you forget that the pit stops on your adventure are just as important as your end goal.
Totally.
Berserk tells you that sometimes striving for perfection within yourself disables you from being content with who you are and where you are and who you're surrounded by. I have imposter syndrome.
Welcome to the club,
it's
my
fine.
friend.
I'm fine, but it keeps me from realizing my own potential at times.
all the
The
time.
fact I have a passion that I can't execute because of my
One thing that I've had to tell myself constantly is that I'm no different than anybody else. That we can all, understand that we are completely capable of achieving the things that we want to achieve. But you do have to be really careful when you're chasing success or a passion or whatever to not lose track of the life that's happening around you as well, because it's such a tempting thing to do. There are so many moments that are happening in conjunction all around the world. And for me, this moment that I'm sitting in right now is different than the moment that someone else is sitting in, even downstairs in the same place that I live, even across the street, even around the world. There are just all these different moments happening. And for everybody, the reality is a shared experience, but it's also not collective. It's individualistic in a really surprising way. Even though we sort of go through all these moments and we can relate them to each other, it is a very different thing to be a person who is experiencing a moment than to be a different person who is experiencing a moment that is very similar. Your existence in the world is almost created that way. Your individualism is created that way, and your balance of who you want to be and who you are currently and what's happening to you in your life currently, and your desire to either get the thing that you want or to be happy and content in the place that you are. The balance of that is a big part of what decides what you're like as a person. And I think that a lot of us don't even know that we're making that decision constantly, that your comfort level and your willingness to put yourself through the fire in order to gain the thing that you sort of secretly want is really truly there. And I think that it's important to do both of them, right? I believe in that statement of, he who desires but acts not breeds pestilence. I believe in that if you want something and you're sitting around just not doing anything about it because you're afraid to try for it, you will become a bitter, dejected, angry human being who has, issues whenever you see someone else chasing after what they want, because you think that idiot, he doesn't even know the things that I know, and he shouldn't be doing that. He's not good enough to do that, all these kinds of things. But you're seeing the journey because people are putting themselves out there. That being said, there is a truth in the fact that the person who has overcome and wants to only push for their real life becomes a person who is not very fun to be around, who will alienate themselves from a ton of other people and will have to seek out friendship in other self-absorbed people, which by nature will not work out for them, because the self-absorbed, I only want what I want and you're a means to my end, and that's all other people are, is the antithesis of friendship. So you have to find this sort of balance for yourself, and that's going to look different for every person. A lot of times these hyper successful CEOs that we see fall on one super far end of that spectrum, and the people who are, just at the bar every single night, hanging out with people, living for this moment explicitly and not thinking about their future whatsoever, are at this other end of the spectrum. And I think that you can look at the end of their lives and you can see the sort of pitfalls that happened all over the course of that journey that we didn't really get to understand at that point. The hyper successful CEO who at the end of his life has all this money and all the success and all these employees and all these, things, but has no true relationships and no true friends, versus the person who spent their whole time just sort of goofing off and trying to have friends and trying to do all these things, but then ends up in a place to where they don't have anything to keep them safe whenever the hard times come knocking, and they end up in these horrible situations because of that. And all those friends who they thought they had end up not being able to help them out either, because those friends were doing the exact same thing. That's another end of that spectrum that you have to consider whenever you're looking at it. And what you realize too is that life is honestly not really a straight line for most people. So as you see, Griffith sacrifices everything in order to get what he wants in life. And then once he has that, it forges guts into the person who no longer really cares about those moments anymore and becomes singularly focused on this one thing, which is stopping Griffith and these other gods that he has aligned himself with. And that becomes his entire purpose. And he sort of steps on a lot of people to get there, even though there's illusions that he is, remorseful that he is doing these things. He's becoming forged in that fire as well at this moment, and it's really incredible to watch.
Circumstances and mental state. I also acknowledge I'm not the most consistent uploader or even the best content creator. That eats me up inside, and telling that to a self-conscious person like me, it really helped me put things into perspective. When I say Jujutsu Kaisen fails as a story, this is what I mean. In trying to be subversive and deconstructive, it misses something. It misses that genuine connection someone can have with a piece of work. It misses the connection an author can have with their audience. We come so close
I
to
disagree.
prying open the brain of Akutami, learning about him and learning about ourselves through him, and then he severs that feeling almost instantly. I can't be invested if you don't let me.
I disagree. I heavily disagree. I'm very connected to Jujutsu Kaisen. I'm very invested in, or have been very invested in that plot line, the same way that I was invested in tons of other anime, the same way that I've been invested in Berserk and Baki and all these different things, and Yu Hakusho and Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo, and I live in these worlds while they're happening, but then once they're over, they become a part of a chapter in a book for me that I can flip back through and see what those things taught me, and I can revisit and re-understand things, and it is a paradigm shift that happens inside of you where you stop trying to look for something that is going to be the entirety of your whole life for a while. You start to think of things as pieces that are put together to make the scene of your life currently. This section of my life will be marked by the times that I was watching Jujutsu Kaisen, but also by the times that I was streaming and making videos on YouTube, and also by the times that I was meeting all these people in Discord. And, there's a whole bunch of things in my life that are happening currently all at once. And that's sort of the world that you're living in Jujutsu Kaisen. There are countless things going on in this world, and you can't spend too much time on each one because the story would be so unbelievably drawn out. And you see that in a show like Naruto, where it has all these filler arcs to flesh out all of these side characters to give you more love for those characters, when honestly they probably don't really need to be there in the first place, other than to show up at the end battle to have this big moment where you can have some character deaths that actually make you feel something. And Jujutsu Kaisen is speedrunning that, We don't have this sort of main character to grip onto. Things are flashing around us. And yes, Yuji Itadori is the main character of that show. And yes, he is the obelisk that we hold onto and try to get blown away by the storm. But realistically, the world is the character that you're latching onto. And that's the feeling that you're supposed to sort of lean into and let it wash over you. It moves very, very quickly. And I think a lot of people just sort of can't keep up with that speed and that dynamic that's going on in it. But for someone like me who, one of my favorite anime of all time is Fooly Cooly, and that show has less than 10 episodes in it. And there's so much more that you want to know about that world when it's over that you basically can't. I love whenever I get done watching a show for the first time and I immediately go to Reddit and start seeing other people's discussion about the show and what their thoughts are about it. And Jujutsu Kaisen is the perfect kind of show to have that happen.
Berserk shows you can have a dark story that's simple and still delivers a gut-wrenching and emotional story that even guides someone like me into being a better version of myself. Hunter x Hunter shows that you can be self-indulgent, deep, intricate, and still deliver a thought-out, character-driven story that pays attention to the needs of its cast members. Both of these stories have something Jujutsu Kaisen severely lacks: the heart to care about the very characters it torments and traps in the cycle of Sukuna, and the will to do anything about it or to show why that torment would even be worth it in the first place. And when you bring that up, when you point out how Jujutsu Kaisen is written unconventionally, you're putting a lid on how stories should be written. But you know what? Maybe we should.
What an odd concept to end on. The idea that maybe we should put a lid on the way that stories are told, that we shouldn't explore other things and continue to move forward. But it's a great video. This video brought out so much in me that I really have a hard time even piecing together the thoughts that I had during it. This is my first time talking about anime, really, so I think the discussion needs to evolve over time, and I'm open to the other discussion from people. If you like the video, you guys should give Naya Speaks a like and subscribe to his channel. He deserves way more subscribers, and this video is really well put together, and he has some interesting thoughts about the topic that I think are really, really good. Yeah, guys, that's the video for today. And if you enjoyed it, I hope you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be safe out there. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.